Welcome to another episode of Pod for Good, a podcast where we learn from those doing good in Tulsa why they care, what we can do, and most importantly, what you can do. Pod for Good is produced and edited by Rant 9 Productions and can be found anywhere you get your podcasts. I am your Chief Philanthropod, Jesse Ulrich.
And I'm your Vice Admiral Philanthropod, Chris Miller.
And today, our guests are Colin Sato and Marco Herrera, the founders of Food for the Screwed, a program which aims to help feed people working in the bar and restaurant industry during this pandemic.
We talked to Colin and Marco about their love of simple food made well, using that love to feed their struggling friends in the service industry, and also whose idea was it to record a podcast this early?
Enjoy. We are very excited to have Marco Herrera and Colin Sato from Vintage Wine Bar and Food for the Screwed on the podcast today. Marco, Colin, how you guys doing?
Doing great.
Good, yeah. Sleepy still, I guess.
Yeah. I imagine as restaurant people, this is early for you, and I thank you for doing that. Yeah. Chris has already been up for like 6 hours, probably. I've been up for like 2.5. So, for people who don't know, please explain to us what Food for the Screwed is.
So Food for the Screwed is basically a program to feed and support our industry friends. So this started when like the shutdown first happened way back in March, where everywhere was closed. It was like before unemployment was coming through, before really anyone knew what was really going to happen, before any of the aid packages had come through. So basically, this is just a way of us trying to cook like very affordable food, either for free, which was our original model, which was like a little bit unsustainable. And now it's just like extremely, extremely cheap. Basically, people pay for the ingredients and then we cook a ton of food and we give it out each week. There's obviously more like details behind it, but that's a basic idea.
Where'd the name come from?
So funny story. It was originally not called Food for the Screwed. Originally, it was called Food for the I don't know if that's allowed to be on the podcast, but I mean, most of it was like, we were like, wow, we really are in a bad spot. Like the business was in a bad spot. We all had no income. Like it was a kind of crazy time. So we're like, man, we got to do something. Like we're all screwed right now. I don't know what we're going to do. We're like, at least we can cook. And we're like, oh, let's make some Food for the Screwed. And then after that, we started talking about it. We're like, it's better than just like letting all of our friends go broke or go hungry. So yeah, that was the idea.
How has it been going? Like, how often are you doing like deliveries? Because you're making meals. Like people are donating money, so you buy ingredients, you make a thing, and then you're delivering those meals to people.
So right now, it's like they pick up food on Sundays. So essentially, it's actually kind of every week, I think, is the week that we just aren't going to be able to do it because we have like the restaurant, we have maybe like slightly more refrigerator space than like an average household. Like we have as much refrigerator space as like rich families in the suburbs that have like a garage fridge is like the
Yes.
amount of refrigerator space that we have. So what that forces us to do is Sundays, we do a quick brunch service. We buy all of the food. We have some food get delivered on Saturdays from food distributors, depending on pricing. But then we cook all of the food in like 6 hours. So like full day, we intake, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of ingredients and then turn them into, I think we're averaging between 300 and 400 meals a week. Colin, would you say?
Wow.
It depends on the person.
Well, and
eating
that's
them.
like per week, really, that's one day. Like on Sundays is the day, because the space is still open. So we're cooking normal a la carte service and people are in the space. And then on Sundays, as soon as we're done with brunch, we're like scrubbing down the kitchen. Marco goes out with his truck. And then we cook like 400 meals out of a kitchen the size of like a big bedroom or something. Yeah, it's kind of madness.
Yeah. And then it's at 6 p.m. everybody shows up and they pick up their bag of food for the week. And then we've been drinking beers at that point for a couple hours. And then we go home and just finally go to bed.
What do these meals look like? I mean, like what kind of stuff are you cooking?
I mean, actually, the crazy thing is like the food is extremely delicious. Like it turns out if you kind of know what you're doing and you get the salt right, you season correctly. And like, so like me and Marco, we're working every day just like as chefs in the kitchen. So, I mean, it's extremely delicious. Usually we'll sort of like hover around some just cuisine that we're wanting to eat that week. So like this last week, we made like a bunch of Israeli food. We made like chickpeas, this little tahini sauce. We did like braised chicken thighs with cumin and coriander. The week before, we did a bunch of like Italian food. What did we do before? It was like stewed pork, beans,
Stewed pork, beans, tortillas, what else? Oh, and then peppers and onions.
Yeah.
So it's like
go ahead.
food you can make like a lot of like different types of meals with. So it's like we don't try to give everyone like, prepackaged like this is the rice, the chicken, and the vegetable. It's like kind of everything together, and then we send out we email everyone. Like Colin writes these like really great like how we use the food. So like make little kind of like this week for Israeli food we made lafas, which are like flatbreads. It's like little sandwiches with laffa and chicken and tahini and pickles that we made. So he sends that out. So it's like all these really cool components for the meals, and we also we've started to give out more raw ingredients. So like this week we just gave out cucumbers and tomatoes and sent out instructions on how to make a nice little Israeli tomato cucumber salad with some lemon vinaigrette that we also gave them. So it's like this fun little thing where you're not just getting food you reheat. It's like you can kind of still feel like you're cooking also, which is cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'd say one other thing about the food that like it's weird because I remember writing about it, sort of like trying to like justify or explain this idea the first time is like it's weird because like it's extremely affordable by design, right? Like the goal, so like people pay $25 and they get like 10 meals worth of food. So it needs to be extremely affordable. Just like we still need to also like get the packaging and all this stuff. It's weird because I realize for some people that feels like, austerity cooking or something, like having to cook for really cheap and make a lot of quantity. But it's weird because like for both Marco and I, like we both grew up in families who cook. We both grew up in families that don't have a ton of money. Like this is the food I actually like to eat. Like my favorite part of the chicken is the chicken thigh. And it's not a coincidence that that's the cheapest. Like for pork, I like pork shoulder. And it's not, you know what I mean? Like this is how we ate growing up. So it is sort of an interesting thing. Like for us, this is sort of cooking like our most meaningful, most personal food. And sort of spanning that gap between like, hey, you're not living in a bad way if you're like eating food that you can make really cheaply. Because rice, beans, these sort of like cheap cuts of meat and vegetables that are really affordable. This is the kind of food that I want to eat like at home. It's like what I cook for myself when I am cooking.
I mean, hasn't there been like a return? I mean, before when we were allowed to go to restaurants, I felt like there was a turn where fancy restaurants were making actually very simple dishes and just charging a lot for them as sort of like a return to simplicity sort of thing. Yeah. And I was like, that's cheating.
It's
right.
It's definitely this cool food aesthetic, which like I think Colin and I have a very, very strong food like working relationship because we have a strong friendship and also because like we just like think about things like very differently most of the time. So a lot of things were spot on, which I think are really healthy also. But like what's funny about all of this is it's just like it's always like this last week, these Israeli components, there was like a lot more of them than normal. And so we were just like scrambling all day to get all the food done. So it like simplicity is like, back to Colin's point. Like, I just think like my whole point here is that like it's like what everybody really wants. And I always like am sort of notorious for like, we were doing these really, really elaborate prefix dinners with like 12 different dishes and, these really, really beautiful food. And like the whole time I would just be joking like, man, I would crush some Whataburger right now. Like I don't want to eat this food at all. But like Food for the Screwed is interesting because it's, it's like cheap and, whatever, like low cost. And that's like throughout the week, I'm like, dude, I'm going to crush some of these chicken thighs and some of this laffa. Yeah. So it's like, it's actually the food that people really want. Mm-hmm. It's just, they don't, not everybody wants to eat tweezer food all the time.
Yeah. That, and it's like comforting, like I think that's one thing, like, especially when like people, there was like a part of the pandemic where I think people were like, I won't see anyone. I will not see my roommate. I will not see my girlfriend. I won't take a walk outside because it was like, everyone's, I will die if I see another person. And like now that at that time when I think people were really isolating in a really serious way, it was also some aspect of like when you can't be like cared for by other people that you want to eat food, that reminds you of being cared for, like chicken soup, or like maybe for me, the dishes are different, or for Marco, the dishes are different. But those foods that remind you of being cared for that was my experience too. Like that's what I wanted to eat when I was like alone. I was like, I don't want to eat, like fancy food. I want to eat like soups and stews and like rice with stuff on top of it because that's what I ate when I was a kid, So, yeah.
What is the fanciest, weirdest thing you have eaten? I'll go first. On a cruise ship, I had a liquefied bruschetta in like a test tube.
Okay.
Ooh.
It was delicious, but weird.
That sounds like something that I would tell Colin to as an idea, as a joke.
Yeah. And I would say,
Yeah.
no.
I was almost like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, I just want some bruschetta. They're like, yes, here's the bruschetta. I'm like,
Yeah. I can't think of anything super fancy or weird. Yeah. Oh, probably just like weird, like goose hearts. Like I ate at this restaurant, Elsky in Chicago. It's a Nordic tasting menu restaurant. It was delicious, but just like really gamey stuff is probably it for me. I'm sure there's as soon as we finish, of course, I'm going to think of something.
My weirdest and my fanciest are probably two different things. My weirdest was probably blood soup, which was actually really good. It sounds weirder than it is.
Is it
It's
like
just
this the Thai dish? Or
Yeah.
no? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. It was in.
It's like raw pork blood, isn't it?
Yeah, but
That
the
is
soup's like
fucking
super hot, so
baller.
it kind of cooks up the blood anyway. So it just sort of like thickens it.
Oh.
It was good.
Not exactly selling it, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
you're like, don't worry. When the
Hot
blood,
blood,
when the blood
yummy.
heats up, it thickens it. It's like,
Don't worry, guys. I didn't drink raw blood.
yeah.
It
I
just
had cooked
tastes
blood.
like a pork soup. Plus,
I like
it's
pork soup.
spicy,
Still
so
not- Yeah, still not selling me on it.
All right. The other one, I had a foie gras candy bar at a restaurant once, where they replaced like what would be like the nougat in a candy bar with like a foie gras thing. I don't know.
Where was
pretty
it?
good. It was in Las Vegas, and I can't remember what the name of the restaurant was.
Hmm.
That's cool. I'm into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That feels very Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I think I know probably. I don't know that it's weird to call it the weirdest, but I think anyone eating it would be like, yeah, this is extremely weird. It's like a common food in Japan, but when I was a kid, we went to we visited Japan, and we had this like wealthy friend, Mr. Yoshitani, and we went to his house, and I was starving, and I was like 5. So I was like looking around the table, did not know what a lot of this stuff was. There's like little fish and things I'd never seen. And I saw what was like surely a potato. You would think was surely a potato. So I ate it. I forget whether it's called, I think satsumaimo is like sweet potato. I think it's called satoimo, but it's basically like, it looks like a potato, but internally it's like the slimy part of okra. Like the whole thing is like okra slime. So I was starving. I just put the whole thing in my mouth, which is still basically how I eat. And it like smashed into just like a mouthful of slime. And I guess I like sat there for a long time. And I was like, I didn't spit it out because like, that was me as a kid.
That's
I was
rude.
like, whatever I'm eating, I'm going to eat. But I like basically did not eat for the rest of the meal. My mom was like asking me later what happened. And I was like, it was so bad. But fancy food, I don't know, actually. That's weird. I feel like I don't eat a lot of like really fancy. I don't know. I'd have to really think about that one.
I don't seek out super fancy food. I mean, because again, when you're hungry, you want to be comforted, not confused or, exploratory, I guess.
I think we've all been at some point in our life where we were trying to eat really cheap because money was tight. And I remember when I was in that situation, it was stuff like, I was making a crock pot of rice and beans because I could make that for about $4 and stretch it over most of a week. Right. So I think most people, when they think of, I need to eat cheap, they think of stuff like that, right? That I'm going to go buy the cheapest meat and make a big pot of goulash and I'm going to try to eat that for, so it's kind of interesting to see your take on it. It's not just feeding people, but it's also you can kind of show people like, hey, you can actually eat good, better food and still eat cheaply.
Yeah.
Was that part of your goal or is that just kind of a byproduct of it?
Well, I think part of it is that like, this isn't like us inventing how to cook for cheap. Like there's whole cuisines basically that came out of like a culture just being poor as all hell. I mean, like I talked to like my dad and especially my grandma about like what they ate growing up. Like my grandma was like, our normal meal is like rice with salt. Like she talks about getting to eat like pickled vegetables, like it was a special thing that would happen a few times a year. But then like within almost every culture, there's dishes that like specifically came out of times when people didn't have a lot of money. They were like not prosperous times. So like that's a cool thing for us is like we don't have to invent cuisines that are awesome when you don't have a lot of money. All you have to do is just look them up. Or like for us, since we like cook a lot, obviously, like we can just think of like, oh yeah, we can make like a curry for extremely cheap. It's not like as cheap as just buying rice and beans, but I mean, we're feeding people for like $1 or $2 a meal. Like most people can't, well, many people who like don't really cook very often would struggle to cook, say, for $2 a meal and make really super tasty, like healthy, balanced food. Because also the food, it's not like it's just like, I mean, I don't know, like it really is healthy. Like there's vegetables, starches, proteins, like not too much salt, not, you know what I mean? Like it's just like good, balanced kind of international food.
Yeah, it's like if you need to find out like a cheap, easy, delicious recipe, it's like ask your grandparents.
Yeah.
Like, what did you have when you were a kid?
Yeah.
And it's usually that thing.
Yeah.
And in my case, it would have been boiled chicken, which is not delicious at all. So I'm glad I don't have to make that now. But there are good, cheap Jewish meals, just not in my family, apparently. So we want people to know how this process works and how they can help you make these meals. So, like, can you walk us through how the process works from a donor's perspective, as someone who wants to give you money to buy these things? Like, where should they go? How much do you need for a certain amount of meals? How often they should give if they want to, that sort of thing.
I guess right now we have a fundraising goal of like roughly $4,200, and I think we're about halfway there. And so actually what the donation would go to is not necessarily food costs, because that is what everybody is paying for. Though I guess if someone was interested in sponsoring like a week of meals for like everybody that receives food, because it's the same people every week, which has been, I think, really cool. So I guess that would be a way if someone was interested and they actually just wanted to purchase food. That's a way they could donate. But so we have a list of like equipment that we need. So I think one of our limiting factors right now is we have a wait list of about 25 people. So every week we're feeding about 35 people, and there's obviously more people that need it and more people that are our friends that are in the industry. And so, but the limiting factor is not only is space, and then like manpower. So truly, or I guess people power is right. We should be saying, but like, so right now it's Colin and I and two other people that like kind of come for a couple hours to help. But Colin and I are doing Ben and Sarah, shout out to them. They're incredible. I don't want to leave them nameless. They're amazing. But, consistently it's Colin and I, buying the food, doing the cooking, the thinking, the seasoning, everything. And so we just don't have enough hands to do it. And so we created a list of equipment that would help us to kind of expand our capacity, even if it was just the two of us. So like a big propane burner to because we have this giant 80-quart pots to cook like big batches of stuff outside. Especially as the weather gets warmer here, hopefully soon, it'll be like a way to do that. So that's where the money will go to. And then that'll go to equipment, and then it'll also go to packaging, and then it'll go to propane to power those. Cause we have one propane burner now that we like, cook big braises in or cook a bunch of sauce and stuff like that.
Like, it's a funny thing. I have only started working in restaurants in the last like 3 years or 2 years, no, 3 years. And it's funny, like if you don't work in restaurants, I think it's easy to not think about like the logistics of just how do things happen, like if you're going to give say 4 or 5 quarts of food to 30 people and you want to make like 150 quarts of food, it's 4 quarts to a gallon. It's like, where do you put 30 gallons of stuff that you need to cook and whatever? Like if I just challenge one of you guys to be like, cool, let's make 100 quarts of anything like at your house, you'd quickly realize like, oh, I don't have 100 quarts of pots to cook anything in. My oven's only going to be able to fit. Yeah. My oven could fit maybe 40, 50 quarts. So like, it's funny. I mean, it's comical in a really fun and maniacal way when we are cooking, where there's times when like there's a propane burner out back, or on the patio, it's on all the way. The flat top is on all the way. 3 burners are on all the way, and the oven is on all the way. And that is just like, it's like every source of heat in the restaurant is working to try to cook food. So yeah, I mean, that equipment, I think it's weird because it's like, it's not like, oh, let's get some really super deluxe stuff. It's just like, how can you move? I mean, this last week we had 120 pounds of chicken thighs. It's like you actually have to get all that cooked and hot and seasoned somehow. So even stuff like just having big containers to mix in, like we're never making quantities like this at the restaurant. Like we're never serving 100 pounds of protein in a night. But yeah, it actually has been a really fun learning experience too. Like as we've started getting some of this stuff to just see like, oh, it's a whole different workflow, but it's cool and it helps.
So are you looking for any additional volunteers? I know you probably only have so much space in the kitchen, but additional, professional, chefs, line cooks, anything like that to help out? Or Are you looking to expand if somebody has additional kitchen space, storage space? Are those other things you might be looking for?
Yeah, if there's someone that wants to just give us their, like we've thought about like a space like Mother Road Market, their kitchen, because they have a big walk-in, would be like really nice to. So yeah, that's something we're thinking about, is like bigger spaces for us to occupy. Because of COVID and our protocols, we're pretty weary of, and like we have such a small staff that if one of us if Colin and I live together, so if one of us gets COVID or has to quarantine, both of us have to quarantine. And so that's like an unfortunate. So we're not particularly looking for people to come and cook, though we would be interested in like a partnership if another restaurant wanted to essentially run their own site, like Food for the Screwed site, then we could, just funnel, like give them their money for their group people that would pick up there, and they would be responsible for cooking the food. So that is something that we are trying to find, because like I said, we have a waiting list of people we're trying to get fed as soon as we can.
Yeah, I mean, because like location wise, you are close to two restaurants I assume have much bigger kitchens than you.
Yeah,
which would be El Guapo's and McNelly's.
Yeah.
So we'll see what we can do about that, because I mean those kitchens are, I imagine, huge. I've never seen them, but only from a side glance on my way to the bathroom, usually intoxicated, but I assume they're big.
Yeah. One thing I am curious about, because you mentioned obviously the style of cooking you're doing for this is different than what you do at the restaurant, but has kind of cooking and maybe experimenting a little bit with this, with different cuisines, stuff like that, has it impacted your style of cooking or anything for what you do for the restaurant?
I mean, for me at least, I would say it's more of like it's like they both come from the same root, I guess. Okay. More so than like, it's weird because for the most part, we're tending towards things like nothing we're cooking on Sundays is like really experimental. It's not edgy. It's not avant-garde at all. But it is interesting because I think there's a part of that core is in our food as well. Like, I think vintage, just by nature of being a wine bar, like I think when people think of wine, they think of like fanciness by and large. And like that's something we're like hoping and trying to change. But like the food we make there, I would say like one of the big things that sets it apart from other people who are like really taking their food seriously and working hard and trying to like push themselves and make new stuff is that like at the root of it, we kind of do value simplicity and more cheap stuff. Like there's no dish on the menu of vintage that costs $10. Everything is less than $10. And there's like pretty cool experimental like dishes with 4 or 5 components, and they're not like crazy. They're all based on like sensible ideas that have existed before. But like I think that's part of it, is like the deeper we get into it, like both Marco and I are pretty young chefs like as far as our career goes, but it's like realizing like part of the core that I really at least can't really get away from is like I don't want to, right now I do not at all want to cook dishes that cost $50 or $60. Even like $40 to me is like kind of crazy. Like when we were doing those dinners that were a little bit more expensive, they're $50 a head. It was like 13 different plates of food. And I like that allowed me to feel really good about, because everyone was really cared for. You come out to like $4 per really cool little taste experience. But yeah, I think like the two just come from the same place, which is like, I want to eat the kind of food that I could afford to eat. I used to be a teacher, so like I couldn't have afforded to spend like $200 on dinner, but I can definitely afford to spend, $50 once a month, or now like $25 once a week to eat for a week. Like that's pretty darn good.
I think Colin and I too, it's like our like the time that we've spent, all the time that we've spent cooking together started with Food for the Screwed. So like we started, in, exactly a year ago, I was assistant principal of an elementary school, and Colin and I were connected through like a mutual friend, and mostly because like people both knew us as people that like to cook, like in general. And at that point, he had already started to work in restaurants. He had left teaching, and so when I joined the team, my first like day at Vintage, my first like was February 17th. So I mean, it was like right before COVID. Yeah, so it was President's Day, and I had a day off, and so we cooked a Japanese style hot pot nabe dinner. That was amazing. But it was like the first time that we had like worked together, and I had already knew I was going to leave my job at the end of the year, and so I like wanted to get back into cooking like professionally. And so and then the pandemic hit. So then it was just like, I remember Colin, like we had planned to do these dinners over spring break, and then everything shut down. And Colin, like I remember we like talked on the phone, and he was like, "Yeah, we're gonna try to do this." Like at the time, it was Food for the Fuck. He was like, "We're gonna try to do this Food for the Fuck thing. Like, do you want to do it?" And I was like, "Absolutely." yes. And then we just started doing it. And so at the time, we were really weary about any of us working together at any point. So there were three of us. There was Colin, myself, and then Nick.
What
Nick,
a guy.
baby,
Nick Smith. Baby Nick.
If you're ever at Cirque, go tell Nick that he's dumb, but we love him so much.
He's not actually a baby, to be clear. We do not endorse child labor, but he is very young. He's like 20.
He's 20. So Nick, same thing, like just kind of was like down to help out. And so I would work 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. Colin would work 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. And then Nick would work 8 a.m. till like all the food was packed up. And so originally it was just like the three of us doing this project. And then as like time went on, we like knew we needed to reopen. So we started doing these dinners and all of this like long-winded story to say like I think Colin and I cook from no matter what type of food it is, no matter like what the aesthetic is, no matter how experimental it is. It's like the end of the day, we want to cook for people that are our friends. And we want to do that like across a variety of contexts. So like even if you're not our friend and you like come to if you come to the restaurant, like Colin and I are on the floor all the time, as much as we can be talking to people about the food. And I think we've made so many friends that like it's like Vintage feels like, this little community. Every night that I work service, there's always somebody that I know, both like who's my friend in a past life that's coming to eat, and then also somebody that we've made friends through the restaurant. So it's like it goes like both the restaurant and Food for the Screwed go back to this idea of like, yeah, we want to cook food that we want to eat and we want to do it for our friends to like, cooking's about community. It's about taking care of each other.
And it sounds like you end up with Restaurant Bill the way it's supposed to be, like 20% food and then 80% whatever you're drinking. So you've got you got plenty of extra money to spend on the wine.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
And I've seen the wine list. There's definitely wine that's over $10. So
there is
yes.
wine over $10, yeah.
Yeah, until Matt lets us get some $2 Chuck in there, everything's going to be. But wine for the most part is over $10.
Which, by the way, a $2 Chuck is no longer $2; it's $3.
Oh,
so it's
Chuck.
$3 Chuck, which does not flow as well. Still gives you a real bad headache the next day.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's good transition into wine, Chris. Let's talk about wine for a little bit because I am not a wine connoisseur. Chris can judge himself.
I am not.
I do know what I like and I do know what I don't like, but what I still can't figure out is why some wines are expensive and why some wines are not. So also, first question though, I want to know your thoughts on corks, twist tops, and I guess cans/boxes as far as wine goes. As far as how they actually serve a wine and whether a wine that has one of those actually affects how it tastes.
I defer to Colin here. Colin is Mr. Wine.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not actually Mr. Wine whatever, but before I used to work at Orin over on Brookside, and I was like buying the wine and doing all the tastings, which by the way, I realized like I don't know how people really, if you don't have money or you don't have someone who already knows about wine, I have no idea how you figure it out. But it's nice when you're buying wine for a restaurant, wine reps just come and taste you on I probably tried like several hundred bottles just while I was there, all for free. They're like, please buy this for the restaurant. Yeah, twist tops are good. Corks are good. I don't think I've ever actually had a good wine in a can, but I don't know. That may just be a coincidence. Like I imagine people who are like in France making fancy wine aren't really feeling the pressure to go to cans. And then same with box wine. I mean, like, I think there's some decent box. Like this is the weird thing that I didn't know about wine is like there's a ton of stuff that is like good. Like I wouldn't even say the majority of stuff, but there's an enormous amount of wine that's good from every like spectrum. And then there's a little bit that's excellent. And I would say like a little bit that's truly awful. So I feel like probably a lot of box wine like fits in the category of just being like good, like not great. Like we probably, if we're only going to have like 20 wines on our by the glass, we're probably not going to have one of them be a box. But at the same time, like, I mean, also, like me and Marco don't really have super expensive taste like in wine either. Like we both really like wine. I mean, partially like we spend all day around people who are like obsessed with it and like know a ton about it. So that obviously helps. No, I mean, I think like fanciness, like that's for me, like one of the worst things about wine is it feels fancy, other places in the world, people just drink it with dinner every day. It's like drinking a Coke or something, but yeah, no, I love wine.
I learned a lot about the problems with cork and wine on my honeymoon in New Zealand, where they just stopped getting cork because half of their shipments were ruined by the time they got it. And they're like, there's got to be a better system than this, right?
Yeah.
And so they just, twist off every bottle. I'm like, yeah, this is a stupid system. Why are we doing this? Like, there's better ways to keep wine, to last longer than a cork. What I'm curious now, like what we're going to talk about here for the last couple minutes before Chris has to go, is like, where do you all see this program going as the sort of pandemic continues and eventually we may or may not all get the vaccine? Like, these people still don't necessarily make a lot of money in the service industry, and it's going to take the service industry a while to recover. So, like, have you guys thought about what's version 2 of this?
It's kind of crazy, but right now it sort of works the way that it is. I think our vision is like 30 weeks. So that's like from when we started, like October, right? September, October. So, I mean, that's like, there's some, I've stopped trying to figure out when the world will be fully vaccinated and I can be out and about and go to Texas Roadhouse. But like, for now, I think our plan is to keep doing what we're doing and hopefully find it, like I said, another restaurant or a space that allows us to increase our capacity. And then or we die, from COVID. Who knows? It's either death. It's like death or 30 weeks will happen. So I don't really think of life much further than that. So I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing about it too, that I think like if people are trying to understand sort of like what the program is, I think it's like very openly not about like saving every person in Tulsa. It was like literally people on our staff were falling short on rent or like having to make difficult choices between what to buy. And then just like people we knew directly, like people whose contacts I have in my phone, I would see like on social media or something like, hey, I'm in a rough spot. I need help, blah, blah, blah. This is just us trying to reach the community that we're closest to with like all the resources that we have available. I think for Marco and I, like it's not our goal to make this like our full-time job. Like we do this on essentially a day off. Like we clock out at the end of brunch and we cook, listen to music. There's no one else in the building. So it's just like a fun day for us to do like what the mission really is. But yeah, I think like, I don't know that there is a version 2. Like we're not like Jose Andres has this thing, World Kitchen. Like we're not trying to be World Kitchen. We're not really trying to like save the world or even Tulsa as a whole. It's just like, if we're connected to these people and we know they need it and it's within our power to do it, then like, we're going to try to do it.
So more of a we'll say a fluff question. So what's been the favorite thing that you've made doing this? What's been your favorite?
It nearly
meal?
killed us, but it's been Israeli for me. Oh, I don't know. We made this Thai curry, or I guess original food for the screwed. These picadillo one time was pretty good, but picadillo tostadas were good. But which maybe we should bring back this week, chef. But anyway, for me the chicken thighs and I also ate it last night. Like I had a laffa with chicken thighs, tahini sauce, and pickles, and like you just can't beat it. You can't beat that food. That food is just so good. So yeah, that's up there.
It really is so delicious. It's like I'm craving it right now. I haven't eaten yet. Oh my God. No, that's because he will be hesitant to say it because it was him leading that dish. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, so we made these little picadillo tostadas that at first I was like, chef, we're not going to cook that. Like everyone thinks ground beef is like terrible. And he was like, all right, well, I'm just going to cook it and we'll see. Like there were people who like go to Vintage, who go out to like fancy restaurants who are messaging us. This is like back, like we haven't done it on this cycle of Food for the Screwed. This is back like maybe June or something. There were people who like go to all these fancy restaurants. They're regulars at Vintage who are like supporting us with money, but then also getting food to take home to their families. And they were like, this is my favorite dish I've had all year. This is the favorite dish I've had in 3 years. We're like, we cook this, from 2 a.m. until like, the middle of the night in a pot the size of your 3 children. Like, but it's really good. I mean, that's the crazy thing is like, it's really super, super delicious. But yeah, those picadillo tostadas were so good.
Technical question I've noticed from looking at different websites. Is it Food for the Screwed spelled normally or Food for the Screwed 'D? Because I see it both ways. And just from a branding standpoint, I want to both help people find it and, market it.
In the words of Marco, there's literally no way to know.
There's no way to know. I think on our website,
Okay.
it's Food for the Screwed, like just spelled normally. Yeah. I think sometimes I do the apostrophe. It's like, yeah, it changes. Yeah. But I think if I had to give an official answer, it would be Food for the Screwed spelled all the way.
Yeah.
And also the link, it's just like our Vintage homepage, which is winebar Tulsa /donate. This is like we're not doing like a ton of different philanthropical things. So yeah, if you just go to winebartulsa.com/donate, it like explains the program. There's links to donate and everything.
We'll definitely include that. Are you thinking any food for the screwed merch?
We had talked about this back in the day. There's like, I don't know if it was ever meant to be a secret, but the second dish we ever made was gumbo. I'm sorry to bring back all your trauma, Marco. For those who know about gumbo, you cook like this roux at the beginning. So we were doing that in an 80-quart pot. So you're talking about like, 15 pounds of this like boiling oil and flour. So that's what Marco would spend every night doing. And then he'd hand it off to me at 2 a.m. But so for a while,
I would literally be stirring roux for like 4 hours, just standing there.
But so at that time, we called ourselves the Gum Boys, and we had talked about making a shirt with like the faces of us three who were cooking, and then this guy Zach Annette. Shout out to you, Zach. What a guy! He's a true living angel on earth. But he taught us how to make gumbo, so we talked about maybe making that. But we'll see. That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, we have a lot of people. Chef, you said shout out also like Ben and Sarah do for the most part. They've been there every week helping us cook and package food. They're amazing. Matt, who owns Vintage, lets us do literally whatever we want with the food and with Food for the Screwed. And he's always just like, yeah, totally, sure. He like just gives us the credit card and like totally trusts us, which is cool. Shout out to him. And then big shout out to Megan Thee Stallion.
Megan Thee Stallion.
That album came out, and I don't think that we listened to anything else. I think we've given the rest of the kitchen staff, Brad, and big shout to Brad and Alex, our kitchen counterparts. They're incredible too. But I think we've just been giving them a break. But I feel a Megan Thee Stallion.
It's coming back.
Week coming on.
One more kind of specific question. So I think we talked a little bit about, maybe giving people, if we can find people, an opportunity to like sponsor a week. So you don't have to get exact, but what does that number look like? Is sponsoring a week, is that like $500? Is that like $1,000? What does a sponsorship look like?
If it's 35 people, $25, so it's $875 would be what it would be to sponsor a week.
Yeah, and like one thing I should say about that is like because of the way we've structured it, if like once we basically hit like our fundraising goal for equipment, like anyone who wants to do that, it's basically like just food cost. I think that's a thing that's nice also about the model. Like right now, the money that we charge our friends, $25 for like a week's worth of meals, they know that all of that, like that is literally our budget. Like this week, it was like we have $750 to spend, and we like go and spend all of it. We get all those ingredients and we cook all of it. So I think in that way, it's a pretty like simple, it's not like, oh, well, how much are the chefs taking? How much? Like we are pay ourselves in a few beers and a lot of just like having fun and talking shit with each other. But yeah, so like if you're sponsoring a week, you're just sponsoring like us buying, 500 pounds of ingredients and then cooking it for our friends.
Decided early on we were going to build in the cost of a case of Miller Lite like every other week. We just accepted that listen, selflessness aside, I need to win too, okay? And I win,
makes sense,
by drinking free Miller Lite.
Champagne of beers, the Miller High Life. Yeah. I feel like you deserve at least that for cooking all this food. Thank you both for joining us today. I hope that this podcast helps even slightly in this great program, because there are lots of different kinds of people struggling right now, but I know that restaurant workers and service workers weren't doing great beforehand. And so it became even worse during this pandemic when we all are trying to both not gain 100 pounds, but also support our local businesses and restaurants. So thank you both for joining us. And we wish you luck. And hopefully when we're allowed to go to restaurants again, we can come by the wine bar and eat simply.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to our conversation with Colin and Marco. Please go to www.vintagewinebartelsa.com/donate to support them and this awesome program. You can also find that link in the show notes if you are too lazy to type it out from what I just said. Speaking of the internet, please follow Pod for Good on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And of course, please rate and subscribe us on Apple Podcasts. If you do that, I will read it on air, unedited, whatever it says. And as always, Tulsa, please get it done. Broken Arrow, get it together, and please wear a mask.